In the last video, we discussed about the principles of testing, and I outlined the 7 principles of testing for you in the last video, right? Knowing those principles enable you to become a better tester, better QA engineer, enable you to have better control over your test process. And so in this video, we are going to discuss the fundamental test process, right? Fundamental test process. What processes are followed when testing is done, right? It's a process. So we're going to discuss that process in this video, right? So in the fundamental test process, about 5 stages, right? The process. It starts from test planning and control, test analysis and design, test implementation and execution, evaluating exit criteria and reporting, test closure. Test closure. These are the 5 phases of the test process, right? So we're going to look at them one after the other now. So starting with test planning and control. At this stage of testing, you have to plan your test, right? You have to plan what you are going to test, how you are going to test it. This involves writing up a test plan, right? It involves writing up a plan for your test. So that plan is going to detail what you are going to test, how you are going to test it, the models of the software you're going to test, right? What kind of browser are you going to use? What kind of software are you going to use to run the test? If you're going to run a manual test or an automated test, are you going to use a browser, Mozilla Firefox? Are you going to use Google Chrome or Apple Safari? The timeline for the test. How long is the test going to take? 3 days, 4 days, 2 days, 1 hour? This is where the planning comes in, right? You need to plan for it. Test planning increases your chances of success in the test. So we're going to move over to the other one, test analysis and design. So in this stage, you analyze the product, right? You analyze the product, you analyze the software, right? You analyze how the test is going to go, right? So it involves identifying of test condition and review of the test basis, right? It involves review of the product requirements, architectural design specifications, interfaces between the products. It also involves examining the specifications of the software being tested, right? Review all the product documentation you've been given so as to know what you're testing, right? Or how you're going to go about running this test. So that's what is involved in test analysis and design. So after analyzing the product documents, you're now going to test design, right? Designing the test, designing test cases, designing test scenarios. Once the test basis is studied, right, gaps and ambiguities can be identified, right? These gaps and ambiguities occur when there's an attempt to identify incidents arising at every point in the system and help us preventing defects that may appear in the code, right? So these test conditions provide a high-level list of area of interest in testing, right? In testing, you use the test techniques to define the test conditions. So test implementation and execution, that's the third phase of the test process, right? So during the test implementation and execution, right, the test conditions you designed, right, the test cases you designed, you now implement them, right? You now set up, you implement them, and begin to execute them against the software product, right? Test scenarios, test conditions that were designed after looking at the requirements, you begin to implement and execute them across the product and record the results, right? So in this scenario, of course, you record, you test, you run a test, using the test cases and test scenarios identified and documented, and you record the result if the test passed or failed, if that scenario passed or failed, right? You record the result somewhere and you run all these test cases and scenarios. It could turn out to be a lot of test cases depending on the software you're testing. It could be a lot of test cases. So you run them and you document the results, pass or fail, right? Pass or fail in the test document, right? So execution is running the test suites and individual test cases following predefined test procedures, right? So that is all about executing. So once you've executed all the test cases, you can submit the result to the developer, right? Who is going to take a list of all the failed test cases, right? The failed test cases will now can be recorded into another sheet or somewhere else, right? Called the defect tracker. That defect tracker lists all the defects that have been discovered, all the test cases that failed, and defects that have been discovered during the test, right? And the developer is going to look at that defect tracker and try to fix those defects. So when those defects have been fixed, the developer is going to come back to the QA and say, hey guys, I fixed this defect. And the QA is going to rerun the test to confirm that those defects discovered has been fixed, right? And that's it for test implementation and execution, right? So we're going to the fourth phase, which will be evaluating exit criteria, right? Evaluating exit criteria means determining what to make you stop testing that software product, right? The test has to end somewhere. The test has to stop somewhere. You can't keep testing it forever. So determining the criteria that will enable you to exit the test, stop testing, and certify that this product is okay and it's good to go. So in this phase, you need to measure the results of the test execution against the test objectives, right? And broadcast the test summary report to stakeholders. Yeah, so you submit your test report to all the stakeholders, project manager, the developer, all the whole stakeholders involved in the development, right? The objectives have not been met, of course, you have to return to test execution, of course, with developers and ensure that the objectives are met by retesting the software, submitting the list of defects to the developers, to ensure that they are fixed. And so when all the defects have been fixed, you prepare a test summary report and submit to all the stakeholders, like I said earlier. Of course, that document, that report will summarize all the activities that went on during testing, how testing occurred, what defects were found, how the defects were fixed, right? The dates, timelines of all these events. So that's it for evaluating the exit criteria. And once the test objectives have been met, you can exit the test. You can exit the test. You can stop testing. So now let's go to the fifth phase, which is test closure. Test closure. When testing has been considered complete, you can move on to the test closure phase, right? So in this test closure, you need to perform a check that all the deliverables have been accepted, signed off, and archive the testware, close the environment, analyze all the lessons learned during testing, and use that information to improve the test maturity, right? So that is the final phase of the test process where the test is closed out, right? And all the lessons, all the test documents have been approved, and you ensure all the stakeholders are happy with the test, right? So that is the last phase of test process, right? So I hope this was very insightful, and I'll see you in the next video.